Okay, this is a gaming channel, so we are going to talk about other games, and we're going to talk about Monster Hunter, Monster Hunter Wild specifically. That was Monster Hunter for PS2, but I can't talk about Monster Hunter and without talking about where it's come from, and the reason why too. This is a broader discussion, not just for Monster Hunter Wilds, but why video games are so much worse today than they used to be, right? And nostalgia is a powerful thing. Nostalgia makes me remember Monster Hunter and how fun it was playing with my friends. And truth is that, back in the day, it was a very clunky mess. It wasn't, it, wa- it was a good concept, but it didn't have anything amazing like it does today. It has evolved so far in the time that I've been alive that it's incredible to see. But back then, you could get away with having very simple textures, very simple models, very simple animations and rigs, very simple effects, if any. I mean, like, look, even the shadows get clipped into the ground, right? Like, you can see the hard lines of the polygons used to create the assets back then. Uh, these images back here are literally just like a lot of flat textures, and the texel density is all over the place. Texel density is like, seeing that this is blurrier than this, even though they're right next to each other. Games back then just they could cut a lot of corners because of the fact that it was just limitations at the time. You did what you could to save on space, and so what you lacked in content, what you lacked in good art, you made up for in good content, right? It had to be a fun experience because no one was going to look at this and play, hundreds of hours of a game like this if it wasn't fun to play. So games back in the day did focus more on gameplay first. But as time went on, the art got better. Art became a great way to sell games. It became a great way to get people's eyes hooked on things. And because of it, people then had greater and greater expectations of what art was supposed to look like and how good it was supposed to be. Uh, this is hilarious to me. Um, and that's kind of killed gaming to me. It's kind of made gaming significantly worse. It's not for the better. And don't get me wrong, as a 3D artist, I love good, amazing 3D art. But you can't sit there and make a bunch of art and make a bunch of content at the same time. It just takes too much time because, like, what you're seeing here, like I said, you can see the harsh lines of the model. All right, you can see the stretched textures where people were trying to cut corners where they could, and even then, this is just like one singular color map. It's not all the other maps associated with it. There's limited to no effects. There's like one light lighting the entire scene. Even these shadows are just fake, right? These aren't clear. These are clearly not real shadows for these things, right? It's projected onto the ground to give you a sort of a fake sense of depth, and that's what games had to do back then. Is they just faked a bunch of stuff to give you this sort of illusion of reality. But as a kid, you might remember it differently, thinking of how awesome it looked. But when you go back and play it, and you're like, "Oh wow, this was really kind of like ugly in comparison." That's because you're used to different stuff now. Uh, and now Monster Hunter Wilds, like, I understand and I agree. It has performance issues, which is a problem to me. But I've also seen people complaining about how the textures are blurry and, how it's just not okay. Like the textile density is all over the place and it still has those issues. But here's the thing is like, I don't care about blurry textures. The optimization, sure. But, when I'm looking at this, there's so much content created here that even just this environment alone, I don't think people understand how difficult it is to create this sort of glow bounce lighting effect and how expensive that is. This is just this is all one like lighting setup, right? It's one light with like harsh shadows. This has bounce light, this has ambient occlusion, uh this has fog effects, like all of that stuff is the stuff where not, that's why things are so crazy uh complicated and expensive for your machines. It's not even just the textures alone. The textures are the easy part to me. It's the post processing that happens afterwards. Because even as you have these effects, even as these characters move through this environment, they're directly affecting it by you know uh, passing through like that water and stuff will actually move the mud around. There's so many more things involved with making a game like this look good that it just takes so much more time to create that kind of art. And so you can't help but that you are just going to have less and less content over time. Uh, because the way I see it is, generally speaking, you can have a lot of content, you can have pretty art, or you can have a great optimized game. But you can't have all three. It's just not possible. Uh, and that's the problem that we run into today with a lot of games, is that they come out and a lot of times they look really pretty, and that pretty factor sells to gamers, but it also sells to investors, right? It's a wow factor, because truth is, the best part about games and the reason why games are good is when you get your hands on them and you play them and they're fun. uh, that's the reason why PlayStation 2 Monster Hunter was still so successful, was that when you got your hands on it, you finally did play, you're like, oh, I could see the potential here, this could be a really good game. uh, but that's something that was it's very difficult to sell, especially on these projects where they're going to cost millions upon millions of dollars, right? And the people investing those millions and millions of dollars probably don't play video games very much, or if at all. So, uh, to them, the only thing that registers as, a game being good is if it looks good. So they invest a bunch of money in the art to look good. The gamers have expectations of art looking good. And the expectations gamers have is they're just like, well, I saw one studio make a game and it looked really good. Why couldn't you do the same thing? It's like, well, completely different. Like, a lot of times the artists might be talented enough to do the same, but there's technical limitations, right? Uh, a good example is like there's certain I can't remember which fighting game it was. One of the fighting Guilty Gear, I think. One of the fighting games where they did an amazing cell shaded look. It was a very specific technique and it looked amazing. However, if you tried to replicate that in a different type of game, it might not have worked, because of the fact that in a fighting game, you only have to worry about the two characters. But try to mass produce that on a huge scale and it doesn't work anymore. There's a lot of things like that where, even as one studio figures out how to solve a problem, they're the only ones who knew how to solve that problem. And it would cost a bunch of money to try and figure out how to solve it for your own game. Uh, but yeah, there's just so many more factors involved and so many more expectations, both from like investors and the gamer standpoint of what people want to see. And while I agree that the optimization thing is definitely something that should be fixed, I totally understand. When playing a game like this, it just plays better at 60 frames a second at least. Like at a smooth 60 FPS, action games like this just feel better, and I think that's where they should be. But we need to understand that we should also be okay sacrificing some of that visual quality. And sacrificing some of that visual quality as well also means that we should be able to have more content. Because at the end of the day, how the game looks in motion when you're playing the game like this is what matters to me. If I zoom in on the texture of the character now and I see that it's blurry, I don't really care, right? That's the reason why, like, when I see cutscenes and stuff and like textures are blurry, to me, that's not a super big deal. Uh, I don't mind that. I only want to make sure it looks good when it's in motion and it plays good in motion. Uh, cutscenes, cutscenes or whatever. Cutscenes aren't gameplay to me. Uh, and I think that's something that we as gamers need to sort of change our messaging on. We need to make sure that we let people know that, and let the studios and companies know that, just like, hey, I don't mind the blurry textures. Just make sure it runs efficiently, right? Because I think like the first video I saw when I was watching about the Monster Hunter Wilds like performance issues, they mentioned the blurry textures. That was the one that just like irked me the most, because I'm like, dude, just make sure it just runs well. Just make sure it runs well and I have a lot of content, because I understand here, you know, let's compare, right? This is just a barrel, right? This is a barrel. It has at least one, two, three, it could be like two or three unique textures, maybe more. Uh, the modeling here, like it's the full barrel. It's you got the ropes modeled out. These look separate, right? And then we look at this, right? Look at the quality of things here. Look at the camp, right? Look at the you can see you can see the straight lines of the models here, right? The amount of time that it takes to make old games is significantly less than what it is today. And this is just a barrel. This isn't even something you see all the time. Uh, but that's what I mean is that the we just as games have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, they cost more and more money and they're more and more expensive. And all that money goes into creating these things and make them look as amazing as they do. And although I think it really is amazing, I think companies need to focus more on just that optimization and that content and less on making sure that all of the art is as high res as possible. And I think that's both from like, the studios creating these games as well as it is gamers having that expectation that the games just be, this perfect level of beautiful because truth is making games is a lot more complicated than it used to be. I don't think it's necessarily about like making them fun is more complicated. I think it's just a matter of there's so many more moving parts because that even these creatures and the characters, the skeleton rigs in which they use are far more complicated than they ever used to be. Uh, and there's just a lot of work that goes into them. But I think it's we all need to have a we all need to have better priorities, right? And focusing and asking and making sure that we have expectations of companies of saying, hey, we prefer a game with lots of content that's very well optimized versus a game that is perfect, right? If you have some blurry textures, have some blurry textures, it's fine. Uh, but then again, maybe I'm just saying this because I grew up playing the Nintendo and I only had pixels when I was a kid, and to me, this is already like a huge upgrade. Uh, but yeah, that being said, despite its technical issues, I think Monster Hunter Wilds is a fantastic game. It's really fun to play with friends, and it does have at least a lot of settings and sliders which can get you around and get you the game working at a better FPS. So that I appreciate. Um, but yeah, I would still, just like Marvel Rivals, it has its FPS drops, it has its optimization issues, but it's still a ton of fun, and that to me was what matters more. So if you're needing a break from the stress and anxiety of Marvel Rivals, I highly recommend getting Monster Hunter Wilds with your friends and uh, hopping on and giving it a shot. If you've never played a Monster Hunter before, then I think that Monster Hunter Wilds is an excellent one to step into. I got my buddy newly addicted to it, and yeah, as soon as this video is done recording, I'm gonna hop back onto it as well. But yeah, that's just my long rant on video games and art in the industry. So hopefully you guys found it interesting. But yeah, I hope one day we get back to you know uh, just investing more in gameplay, investing more in optimization. Because I would much rather look at a game that was blurry and had good gameplay for 70 hours than play a game that was beautiful for 5. Uh, but yeah, that might just be me. I don't know. Maybe I'm the minority. But if there's any old school gamers like me, or even new school ones that appreciate just the good gameplay, let me know. Because I don't know. I don't know why they keep just focusing on making all those beautiful art, but 6 hour long games. But um, I don't know. Maybe those people. Maybe there are people out there for that sort of experience. But if I'm paying $70, I want to make sure I'm getting 70 hours. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just me.